Okay, well, welcome to my Scorched Earth photography project. This is a project I've been wanting to work on for several years now, and I just haven't really had the opportunity or the means, at least to do it in the way I had liked. We've had a lot of wildfires out here in Southern California, and in particular, the town where I live, we've experienced 3 major ones in the last couple of years, and they've burned, thousands of acres and come very close to torching a whole lot of houses. And the fires have gotten worse and worse over the years. More and more of them, more severe, faster rates of spread, harder to contain, and so on and so forth. The woodland benefits from wildfires in that it is a very restorative process. However, the human factors involved here aren't in any way natural, and so we're kind of disrupting the natural order of things by, in some cases, preventing wildfires. And so the place gets really overgrown, and that creates a fuel problem, which exacerbates the fire problem itself. And in other cases, we just have too many wildfires. Humans have actually started a lot of these fires too, mostly arsonists for various quote-unquote reasons, which is horribly sad. It's a real travesty. But anyway, I wanted to show the beauty, sort of a somber beauty, that happens when the forest begins to recover after each of these wildfires. And so that's what I'm doing here with this project. Now you'll notice I am shooting this on digital. I love film, that's no secret. But I also shoot mostly 8x10. And 8x10 costs about, $25 a click or so to create. And even 4x5 is extremely expensive. It's about maybe half of that, depends on which film stock you shoot, but I do a lot of slide film. And then I have to pay to develop it, so it's about $4.50 a sheet to develop it, plus my film cost, plus my time and expense going back and forth. And it basically means that because of the expense of film and because of the time delays involved, I can't do experimental photography. Like, I can't go out and just shoot a whole bunch of photos of a location with no guarantees that they're going to turn out whatsoever, that they're just purely experimental. They're way out of my comfort zone. I'm doing something in a new location of unconventional subjects, of, in weird conditions. And I want to be able to experiment. In order to grow as an artist, I have to be able to experiment. I also have to be able to iterate rapidly. So, for example, with this particular project, I'm coming out to these locations and I'm photographing a location initially, and then oftentimes I'll go home, I'll work on the images, and I'll discover something that I don't like. I'll say, maybe I should have shot this later in the day during blue hour, or maybe I should have shot it with some mist, or maybe I screwed up the composition and I think I should change it. Well, then I can go back out literally the next day and reshoot it 2 or 3 times even. And that allows me to create the ultimate image of each scene. And that level of rapid iteration of improvement is only really possible with digital, unless you're just loaded financially and have a dark room that can do color work at home. And even then, the time constraints, it just takes way too much time. So I'm trying to do essentially a hybrid approach of photojournalism melded with fine art landscape photography. So the process here is a documentary process. I'm documenting the recovery of the forest, but it's also an artistic process because these photographs are intended to be beautiful. They're intended to be something you'd hang on your wall or see in a gallery, purchase a book of, or a box set. And so, they can't just be like ugly, in your face photojournalism, because that wouldn't fit with my intended use case for the images. I want to convey a somber beauty, sort of an ethereal look. And so in order to do that, I've found that digital is going to work the best for that. So that's why you'll see me with a digital camera on this project. It's not like I'm giving up on film or I hate film. It's not that I love digital or think it's the only tool for the job. It's just picking the right tool for the job. So without further ado, let's get on with this project. So let me walk you through the first composition. This is a composition where we have these new sycamore trees sprouting up at the base of their parents. And then we also have a bunch of layers of vertical lines coming up on the right side. So you kind of got two groups of trees on each side of the composition. And then behind it, you have this gully, which is the exit from like a wash, basically a vertical wash. And there's a whole bunch of huge granite boulders that are sort of bluish gray, and they're perfectly lined up in that wash, which really kind of gives you a nice leading line out of the back of the composition. And then there's also a slope of little shrubs going up the same slope above the boulders. So you have a secondary leading line going out of the back of the composition. And then further, we have a sandy wash, like the same wash from the boulders, kind of washing through the scene, and that kind of gives you a foreground interest, so which serves as another leading line. So altogether, the scene kind of comes together pretty nicely with about 3 different visual layers, and I really like it. It's a very contrasty scene in the sense of like you have like dark blacks, and then you have these grayish blues, and then you have these whites. But it's an easy scene to shoot because it is fairly flat in terms of dynamic range. So that's one of the first compositions. And you'll see on the terms of technical details, I may as well share them because some of you will find it helpful. This is the Panasonic G9 Micro Four Thirds camera. I know it's an unconventional choice, but I really don't care. I like Micro Four Thirds. It is a joy to work with. The lenses are tiny, 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 and super lightweight and very affordable and razor sharp. And it's easy to get great glass that doesn't weigh a ton and doesn't cost a ton. So the glass is probably the biggest reason. Secondly, they have the best image stabilization in the world. This particular camera has 6.5 stops, which essentially eliminates the need for a tripod in all but one case, and that is when you are doing pretty long exposures, like more than a couple seconds, because the 6.5 stops, you can basically handhold a second. But what I'm using the tripod for is the high-res pixel shift mode. And a lot of the Sonys have high-res mode, but what's unique about the Micro Four Thirds cameras is that they have in-body pixel shift, which means the camera takes 8 separate exposures in a split second and combines them together instantly by shifting the sensor half a pixel in each direction. And basically it creates an image with a lot of color depth, similar if you're familiar with like the Foveon sensors that Sigma used to make. It's a similar concept to that. It's like basically Bayer arrays are how most sensors work, and they have all these dots, and that's how this sensor works. What it does is it shifts the RGB dots around to kind of essentially soak up the light at each pixel location with each different color. Probably butchering the scientific explanation, but the bottom line is you end up with super clean images with great color depth and great dynamic range that are 80 megapixel raw files, and it does that all in a split second in camera very quickly. However, it does require you to be on a tripod because the camera has to use the image stabilization system to shift the sensor. And so because of that, it has to turn it off and basically take it over from you. And so it doesn't have the ability to stabilize the camera and do the pixel shift simultaneously. Now, I do think that tech is coming soon. Olympus has it in their EM1X, so it's probably just a matter of time before Panasonic, catches up to that. But the EM1X is a lot bigger, it's a lot heavier, and it's a lot more expensive, which is why I didn't go with that camera. So anyway, the files are legitimate 80 megapixel files. They aren't, synthetic imitation 80 megapixel files. You can go on DP Review, hold them up to, a Fujifilm GFX 100, and they are right there, neck on neck in terms of detail, resolution, and quality. So pretty nuts for a camera that costs less than $1,000. So that's what I'm doing, 80 megapixel RAW files, and then editing those in Capture One, which gives you, if you've seen Thomas Heaton's video, it gives you really, really nice images. Super clean, like zero noise, razor sharp, amazing sharpening capabilities, super clean, and preserves that dynamic range and color tonality really well. So that's kind of the combo. That's what I'm using. And yeah, camera's on all manual everything. So trying to kind of preserve that slow, methodical approach that I use with large format, hence the three-way head and the L bracket and everything being in manual kind of just allows me to really slow down and treat it like a little large format camera with my workflow as far as how slow I go, how deliberate I go with the compositions and the exposures. Because I do not want my shot discipline to fall off just because I'm shooting digital. So the idea here is to still maintain my normal, virtually 100% hit rate, but without the overhead cost and time requirements of film. So that's what I'm doing, and it is working quite well so far. And one more thing that I'd like to answer is Micro Four Thirds depth of field, because that's something that it seems like always comes up. It's kind of silly. With a lot of photography genres like wedding photography, portrait photography, they have this sort of obsession with bokeh or the blurry out of focus areas in the image. However, you'll be familiar that landscape photography, we kind of drive for the exact opposite. We want every pixel in our image to be razor sharp and so perfectly focused. So for example, at f8 with this camera, I have about the depth of field of f16 on a 35 millimeter, quote unquote, full frame camera. And what that does is allows me to use faster shutter speeds at each, with twice as much depth of field. So I can still have the shutter speed of f8, but with the depth of field of f16. Now, any landscape photographer with any amount of experience whatsoever should understand that that is a huge asset, a huge benefit, because it's almost like having a cheat code for your photography, because like leaves are constantly blowing around, and it's so great to be able to have a really fast shutter speed to freeze the leaf subject motion, but still have that depth of field that you need to get everything in focus. So that's something I like about the system. Well, this is another composition I've been working on, and it's just real simple. You got this new plant growing out between this granite boulder and this completely scorched tree trunk here, and it creates this sort of black and white yin and yang type feel to it, where you've got this really light tones and textures in this boulder, and then these dark, shiny, sort of bluish reflections in the tree trunk. And you know, you could photograph it from this angle or that angle. It doesn't really matter because the effect is about the same, but it just has amazing contrast in texture, in color, in depth. You've got blue tones, you've got green tones, you've got whites, you've got blacks, and it's very symmetrical. So you've got like light, tree, dark, and it's kind of like split right down the middle as a vertical composition. So beautiful image, lots of detail in the leaves and lots of detail in the trunk and in the granite, and I think it comes out really nicely. So if you can't tell, I already shot this like a week ago, and I'm kind of just coming back through these compositions and explaining them all to you guys, because at the time when I shot them, I was not sure they were going to turn out, and so I didn't even bother to film any video. It was just purely experimental. But now I'm kind of realizing if I don't document the process, the project will have a lot less meaning for most of you, because you won't have been able to see what went into it or why I created it or how I created it or anything like that. So I want to share the story with you, and so I'm going back to each of the compositions, walking you through them, explaining everything, and hopefully that'll prove helpful, insightful, useful, or just fun for you guys to watch. So anyway, this is the second composition. Oh, there are a lot of birds around here. I just got my head buzzed by a hummingbird. So what do you know? I decided after shooting the video that I might actually try a composition from this angle, similar to the video camera. Had to move the camera back because I put the tripod in the same area that it was in before. The video camera was in before. But this one is a horizontal composition because by moving back to this angle, I was able to actually get a wider composition, which has a little bit more context and will open up some more printing options. So sometimes there is a benefit to revisiting the scene over and over again. You know, one thing that doesn't come across in these videos is the smell. This whole area smells like a doused campfire. Yeah, like wet ash. Well, this is another scene that I've set up on, and I tried a couple different angles on it. I did try one from over this way, and then I also decided to come into the center of the wash here because with the center of the wash you get this really nice leading line that goes straight up into the composition, then forks and kind of breaks to the left and the right around the two trees on the left side. And then you have these two trees on the right side. So you have these sort of double forks, and then each fork has the leaves in the middle, kind of similar to one of my previous compositions. But in this case, the white ash filled wash just creates this almost lava flow like effect. It looks like a lava flow, and it's just flowing through the scene with this white ash. And the white ash kind of mirrors the white trunks of the sycamores, which stand out really starkly against the burned black forest in the background. So you've got the white, the green, the black, the contrast, and I think it like really balances out very nicely. So that's another composition. And in terms of settings for most of these, they are very similar. I tend to shoot at f7.1 because that's kind of right in the sweet spot of the lenses in terms of maximum sharpness, minimum diffraction across the frame. and then ISO 200 usually, because that is the base ISO of this camera, so that's going to give you the cleanest images, and then 80 megapixel high-res mode for maximum resolution. So that's kind of the gist of it. Sometimes I will crank up the ISO to 400 or even 500 to freeze subject motion if necessary. That's one of the nice perks of shooting digital, is that flexible ISO, and I've had zero problem with grain or noise at 500. I've even gone higher, like 640, no issues at all. So, but at 80 megapixels, 500 ISO, they're clean as heck. I mean, they're really nice files, so I don't have any complaints. Very, very nice. And also the dynamic range, similarly. Most of these scenes are flat as a pancake because I'm used to shooting Velvia, which has less than 5 stops of dynamic range for the most part. So my compositional style tends to favor intimate close-up scenes in nature that don't have a sky in them. So I tend to shoot low dynamic range scenes anyway. Not that it matters, but certainly makes my job a lot easier. That's a wrap for today. So I'm gonna get out of here before it gets dark. And until next time, I'm Justin Lowry. Stay curious, and thanks for watching.